Miracle is a mechanic that was originally introduced in Avacyn Restored. That set was about the return of angels to the plane who arrive and save the humans from the plane's monsters, so a mechanic called Miracle was a pretty good fit. Since then, it's appeared from time to time, appearing on a few Universes Beyond and Commander cards. If a card has Miracle, that means it has an alternate casting cost that is usually a huge discount from the spell's normal casting cost, but you only gain access to that alternate cost when a Miracle is the first card you draw in a turn. Basically, they reward you in a big way for being top decked. One thing that's not immediately intuitive about Miracles that makes them even stronger is that even if they aren't an instant, like Entreat the Dead, you can cast them during your opponent's turn, provided they are the first card you draw during your opponent's turn. You reveal the card when you draw it, and you cast it then and there if you want to, even if it's your opponent's turn. Overall, this mechanic has proven to be quite powerful, as most cost reduction mechanics are. There are only 18 cards with Miracle, or that can give Miracle to other cards, and 12 of them have at least one top 8 at a major Magic event. In this video, we'll look at the 10 Miracles that have left the biggest impact on competitive Magic the Gathering. This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. Use the links in the description to visit their store. Before we get started, here's a quick reminder on how I rank cards in these videos. A first tier top 8 is worth 2 points. This includes events like Pro Tours, and a second tier top 8 is worth 1 point. This includes events like Regional Championships. At number 10, it's Revenge of the Hunted. For 4 generic and 2 green, it's a sorcery that until end of turn gives target creature +6/+6 trample and makes all opposing creatures block it if able. Its miracle cost is 1 green mana. Some Miracles have a regular casting cost that is kind of acceptable. This isn't really one of those, as it's a very clunky buff to wait until you get to 6 mana for, and it's definitely less impressive by that stage of the game, but getting this effect for 1 green can be pretty crazy. This effect will wreck lots of early game creatures while letting you do some serious damage. It saw some play in mono green aggro decks while it wasn't standard, but doesn't have any top 8 since 2013. At number 9, it's Devastation Tide. For 3 generic and 2 blue, it's a sorcery that returns all non-land permanents to their owner's hands, and it has Miracle for 1 generic and a blue. Sorcery speed's symmetrical mass bounce effects aren't very good most of the time, mostly because you are the one who usually goes down a card to do it, and then your opponent gets the opportunity to rebuild their board before you do in most cases. However, that whole equation changes when you're only spending 2 mana, and when you can potentially do it during your opponent's turn. And indeed, the Tide has always been played in decks that are particularly geared towards Miracle, including a block deck that was really good at drawing during the opponent's turn every single turn, thanks to Think Twice and Thought Scour. It found more limited success in Standard, but has seen sporadic play in Legacy Miracle decks over the years. These decks were at their height when Sensei's Divining Top was legal in the format, as that could both rig the top of your library and draw you a card during your opponent's turn, so that hitting something like Devastation Tide was more like a foregone conclusion. The top did get banned in Legacy though, and the Tide has continued to see play here and there in the format. After all, Brainstorm is still legal and one of the best cards in the format, and it just so happens to be great with Miracles, too. Still, Devastation Tide's last top 8 came in 2023, and it may be done putting up top 8s in major formats. At number 8, it's Temporal Mastery. For 5 generic and 2 blue, it's a sorcery that lets you take an extra turn, and it gets exiled. Its miracle cost is 1 generic and a blue. In other words, if you miracle this, it becomes Time Walk, a famously busted card that is part of the Power 9. Taking extra turns is very powerful. It's perhaps the most powerful effect in the entire game, because it lets you do a whole bunch of extra stuff while your opponent doesn't get to do anything. Minigames simply end when someone takes an extra turn, especially when they are only spending 2 mana to do it. Unsurprisingly, the Mastery was played in Miracle decks and Block Constructed, but it's also found some success in modern Walks decks, which are all about stringing as many extra turns together as possible, and the Mastery helps the deck get there. More recently, it's been played in Legacy, where the printing of Up the Beanstalk has resulted in it seeing more play. Up the Beanstalk lets you draw cards when you cast spells with a mana value of 5 or greater, and that gets especially nasty when you cast expensive spells, but at a discount, like when you miracle Temporal Mastery. The Mastery doesn't have any top 8 so far in 2025, but it's hard to ever count out a card this powerful entirely. At number 7, it's Thunderous Wrath, which for 4 generic and 2 red is an instant that does 5 damage to any target, and it has a miracle cost of 1 red mana. This is a super inefficient burn spell when you cast it normally, but it's a way better lightning bolt when you miracle it. Still, The fact that it was so overcosted when you couldn't miracle it meant that it didn't really achieve top 8s in block standard or legacy. Even decks that were using miracles weren't very interested, partly because they didn't run red, but the very fact that they didn't run red in order to use this miracle card tells you something. However, it's been successful in the more recent past, putting up top 8s in both Modern and Pauper burn decks. Pauper is a format where only commons are legal, and that format's burn decks have a number of different ways to draw extra cards, allowing them to more easily set up a miracle, like with Voldaren Epicure's Blood Tokens or Needle Drop. Thunderous Wrath doesn't have any top 8 so far in 2025, but I think it's reasonably likely to find more success in Pauper in the future. 1 mana for 5 damage is pretty much unrivaled, even if it does take a little bit of setup. At number 6, it's Reforge the Soul. For 3 generic and 2 red, it's a sorcery, and it makes each player discard their hand and draw 7 cards, and its miracle cost is 1 generic and a red. Like Temporal Mastery, this is a miracle that is a callback to a super powerful alpha card, in this case, Wheel of Fortune. That's even where we get the nickname for this type of effect, which we call wheel effects. They tend to be powerful because they allow you to reload your hand completely, and even when they're symmetrical, there are plenty of ways to break that symmetry. And actually, giving Reforge the Soul Miracle is some pretty big upside that gives you a built-in way to break the symmetry. Most wheel effects are sorcery speed, and that often means your opponent gets to take advantage of their new cards before you do, but if you draw Reforge as your first card during your opponent's turn, you can cast it and make sure you get to use those cards first. It is sometimes featured in Legacy Storm decks, in particular those that use Birgi, God of Storytelling, and Ruby Medallion. Birgi can net you a lot of mana when you cast spells, and the new 7 cards you get from Reforge the Soul usually gives you plenty of mana back, whether or not you cast it for its miracle cost or not, and this makes it easy to get a high storm count and fire off a lethal grape shot thanks to all the spells you cast. It's also played in modern Goblin Charbelcher decks. To maximize their chances of winning the game with the Belcher, these decks usually run 0 to 1 lands. This also makes Recross the Paths quite useful, as it allows you to stack your entire deck. And well, you can see how that would be powerful, because you can put Reforge on top and draw whatever you want in those 7 cards. Reforge the Soul is likely to continue to put up more top 8s in the future. At number 5, it's Triumph of St. Katherine. For 4 generic and a white, it's a 5/5 with lifelink, and when it's put into the graveyard from the battlefield, you exile it and the top 6 cards of your library in a face-down pile, and if you do, you shuffle that pile and put it back on top of your library. Its miracle cost is 1 generic and a white. This card interacts with Miracle in a very interesting way. Since it goes back on top of your library, you're likely to get to cast it for the Miracle cost in the near future, and 2 mana for a 5/5 with lifelink is a sweet deal. The Triumph is from the Warhammer 40k Commander set, so the only 60 card formats it's legal in are Legacy and Vintage, and all of its points have come in the former. As with Temporal Mastery, this miracle sees play alongside Up the Beanstalk, since you can cast it so cheaply and still trigger Up the Beanstalk. Getting this down early makes it pretty impossible for most decks to race you, and then, if it ever dies, you end up getting to draw it again in the relatively near future, especially with a Beanstalk in play because you'll be drawing so many cards. It shows up in pretty much all the Beanstalk decks in Legacy right now, and it's not unusual to see it in the sideboard of other decks too, since it's so good against the format's tempo and aggro decks. It's going to keep putting up top 8s, and I think it has a very good chance at ending up much higher on this list in the future, as several cards in front of it are less active than it is. Speaking of Triumph of St. Katherine, I'd certainly like to triumph this year by getting my 100,000 subscriber plaque. I'm close to hitting that major milestone, and I'd appreciate it if you'd help me get there by hitting the subscribe button. I put out lots of Magic content every single week, and it's free to subscribe, so you won't regret it. At number 4, it's Metamorphosis Fanatic. For 4 generic and 2 black, it's a 4/4 with lifelink, and when it enters, you return up to 1 target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield with a lifelink counter on it. It has a miracle cost of 1 generic and a black. Yeah, this thing is strong. That's why, despite being the newest card on the list by far, it's already at number 4. This despite the fact that it's from a commander set, limiting its legality in 60 card formats to Legacy and Vintage. Like Triumph of St. Katherine, the Fanatic's points have all come in Legacy. It's an insane reanimation spell when you miracle it. You pay 2 mana for a 4/4 with lifelink, plus some huge scary creature that will also have lifelink, and you can potentially do it at instant speed. It means that just using spot removal on the reanimated threat doesn't solve the problem entirely, since you still have a beefy lifelinker hanging around, and one of the best ways to deal with reanimated creatures is with edict effects, but the Fanatic being in play too makes that not matter. As a result, it has very quickly found a home in Legacy Reanimator decks, where it has plenty of amazing cards to reanimate in the early game, as if a very early Archon of Cruelty wasn't already scary enough. It's likely to continue to put up top 8s, and like Triumph of St. Katherine, it'll be much higher on this list in the future. At number 3, it's Bonfire of the Damned. For XX and a red, the Bonfire does X damage to target player and each creature they control, and it has a miracle cost of X and a red. Even when you don't miracle this, it can have an amazing effect on the game. If you have enough mana, it's basically a one-sided Wrath plus a Fireball, and it's much easier to have the requisite mana to do that when you miracle it, since paying X only once is super insane. Because that effect was so massive and so one-sided, it was simply one of the most powerful cards in both the block and standard formats it was part of, and there were many games at the highest level that were won on the back of a miracled Bonfire of the Damned. It's found more sporadic success in both Legacy and Modern. It's had a good run, but it's only very slowly put up points for the last several years and doesn't have a single top 8 since 2023, so I think it's a safe bet to say that Metamorphosis Fanatic and Triumph of St. Katherine are coming for it. At number 2, it's Entreat the Angels. For XX and 3 white, it's a sorcery that creates X 4/4 white angel creature tokens with flying, and its miracle cost is X and 2 white. While it's a little hard to get a great deal on this card when you don't miracle it, when you do, it's absolutely absurd because of its ability to build an angel air force for relatively little mana, and potentially at instant speed. And indeed, the decks that have played Entreat over the years have won the game in exactly that manner, an end-of-turn miracled Entreat that made enough angels to swing for lethal once you untapped. While it has seen sporadic play in block, standard, and modern, Legacy is by far the format where it's done the most work. There, it's been the primary win condition for Miracle decks for a very long time. As I mentioned earlier, those decks were particularly good when Sensei's Divining Top was legal in the format, and it got banned partly because of how good it was at setting up miracles. But Entreat the Angels still sees play in control decks in the format, including in miracle-centric decks. Brainstorm, Ponder, and Sylvan Library can all help you stack the top of your deck to allow you to draw Entreat or other miracles at the exact right time. Entreat's going to keep on gaining points in Legacy, albeit not quite as quickly as Metamorphosis Fanatic and Triumph of St. Katherine. And at number 1, it's Terminus. For 4 generic and 2 white mana, it's a sorcery that puts all creatures on the bottom of their owner's libraries, and it has a miracle cost of a single white mana. So this is basically a Wrath for 1 white mana. Sure, the creatures don't get destroyed, but honestly it's better to put the creatures on the bottom of libraries in a lot of situations, like if a creature has a death trigger or your opponent has graveyard stuff going on. It also gets through obnoxious things like hexproof protection and indestructibility. Unsurprisingly, this powerful sweeper has put up top 8s in every single format it's ever been legal in, generally appearing in control decks, like most sweepers. This includes in decks that aren't even that interested in abusing miracles, but it has found the most success in miracle-oriented Legacy decks, including Sensei's Divining Top decks back in the day. At their height, these decks were the best in the format between their ability to use the top to cast miracles and manipulate their library alongside counterbalance. As you can imagine, playing against a deck that can counter most of your spells for free with counterbalance, and then Terminus away anything you can resolve, and then eventually win the game with a miracled Entreat the Angels, was a very powerful deck. While the top getting banned did decrease just how much Terminus is played, that doesn't mean it isn't seeing play in the format, it's just not completely insane anymore. More recently, it's appeared in the same types of decks in Legacy as the Triumph of St. Katherine as well, alongside Entreat the Angels in miracle-oriented decks that emerged in the wake of the ban of the top. Terminus is going to keep on putting top 8s, and it's fairly likely to hold on to its number 1 spot on the list for the foreseeable future too. So, those are Magic's best miracles. If you're looking for a miracle, check out the description where you can find a direct Card Kingdom link for each card that appeared in the video. If you want to make sure you catch future videos, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to catch up on past MTG Top 10s, including many more that look at specific mechanics, you should see a playlist on your screen shortly. Thanks for watching.
Mm-hmm.